right? What's been dubbed as one of the most exciting unlisted investment opportunities identified by Remgro. This is where we're going to deep dive into more that's being done, not only to evolve and change the lives of people on the coal face of South Africa's economy, but also really see more of the growth opportunities that do exist here. Now, this part of today's session gives us more insight into the Community Investment Ventures Holding, CIVH, which houses key and very pertinent assets within the broadband space. Dark Fiber Africa, together with Vumatel, who have made waves in terms of providing connectivity for South Africans. We'll hear some insight from the executive team in terms of the positioning of the business, its most recent transaction with Vodacom, which was announced just last year, and of course further insight into the growth opportunities that will be unpacked here going forward. Now, I must say that the chairman of CIVH is going to give us an introduction and preparation, and he's all dressed up today. The last time I actually interacted with Peter, he wore red Converse sneakers, he had a red golf shirt on, he was in jeans, and was probably dancing, Peter, but not on tables, but made for quite a bit of an exciting conversation at his time at Vodacom specifically. So he'll give us some insight this time around into a new opportunity, of course, but of course building up on many of these themes. And following that, there will be a Q&A session. So as we did formally with Yanni just a moment ago, we will be addressing your questions both online that can come through the chat platform and, of course, for many of the participants who are with us in the room. Peter, thank you so much. It's over to you.
Thank you. I do remember those red shoes. I'm not a dancer, but I actually managed to do it then. Today, I'm going to introduce you to the team on the stage, but there are more in the audience also that's involved in CIVH, and I'll also point them out. But listening to Yanni, I just clearly recall, I think it was 1992, I was fortunate at the time to be part of that initial startup group. I think we were 3 doing the homework to put Vodacom together. But one of the issues were we could not get funding, and the banks just said no. And Alan called Rembrandt in those days. And I don't know how much money you put in, but it wasn't a lot. Probably paid it cash out of your pocket. 150, sure. But I was at that very first meeting where we put together the business plan, and for Vodacom, it was 250,000 customers over 10 years. And we said, if we can do 250,000 customers in the 10 years, that'll be a good business. Later on, we just had it so wrong, and we connected the full 10-year business plan every week. And while I'm saying it, it almost feels the same standing here today, where we are now. Because when we started, we were looking at 2 million. But now we're looking, the numbers are just starting to change all the time. Last week, the team had a record month. I think they actually passed close to 70,000 homes. They passed the whole 10-year business plan in 1 week. So we are getting in the same realm as where we were then. But before I go too far, let me introduce you to the team. So firstly, Ditlof Marie. He's the CEO of the joint combined infrastructure fiber business inside CIVH. So Ditlof and I also go back a long time. 1995, he joined. What did you do? Make photocopies? In those days, we were in Hatfield, where we started Vodacom. But then he went on, he became the CEO in DRC, CEO in Tanzania, later on in the Vodafone Group, Albania. But what I do remember of Ditlof, he must be one of the most experienced African operators, because as many times in Africa, you need to go into the country with a partner. So we might have picked the wrong partner then, but the partner kept on asking us, it's time to get a dividend now. Now, we were losing lots of money, so we obviously couldn't pay a dividend, but this shareholder just didn't understand how things worked. So finally, they organized, I don't know how they did it. I think the president probably was a shareholder behind you, but they organized a Russian tank that came down the main street in Kinshasa, and they just shot a hole in the finance department. And Ditlof stood his ground, he never paid the dividend. And then Andries Delport also goes back even longer. I mean, Andries is somebody that I can go to war with. I actually literally went to war with Andries. We met in the back then, Defence Force, we all had to do Army. And we were together in Heidelberg. So when I joined Vodacom, looking for good people, I remembered Andries, that he was a very smart guy. And I called him and said, Andries, I know you have your own business doing well, but don't you want to come and join me at Vodacom? And I actually worked for you after a while. You were so good that he took my job and I had to work for him for a couple of years. And then Graham, you have been involved with CIVH for many years. You were the CFO with our other partner, NewGX, Kudu Pichi, and you were his CFO. But the one thing that I remember about you is when we're sitting at board meetings, how you knew more than the management team. That was just impressive. So when the previous CFO left, I begged Kudu and said, Kudu, can we not have Graham as CFO? So Graham's left Kudu and he's joined as the CFO. So thanks for that. So if you have financial questions, he has all those answers. But I also have to mention Raymond Lobo. He's the CEO of the CIVH Group. Maybe just stand up, Raymond. Raymond, ex-Remgro as well, so also go back a long time. Thank you for being here. And then Nayo. Nayo, let me just put this on the screen. So there are the pictures. Nayo, previously, so she's a lawyer. She keeps us on the straight and narrow road. That DM5 there, you are the M, are you not? Yeah, Moshamani M. They still going, are they? Missing you. Thanks for being part of the team. And then Byron, where are you, Byron? There at the back. Ex-DD, you were the CFO, DD Africa, Southern Africa. So in telecoms also for many, many years. So if you look at the team, just on the screen there, the telco team, the experience in telco, it's more than 80 years combined. So this is a formidable team that we've put together here. Today I'm just going to do an introduction, tell you a little bit about where we've come from, where we might be going, and where Vodacom fits in. It's not because I've come from there. There's actually another good reason that they're part of our future partnership. As Yanni mentioned, it's all about partnerships. And there's Herotel. I'll mention Herotel. But then we're going to get to the meat of today. And these three gentlemen are going to tell you a little bit more about how they operate the business. And at the end, we're going to have time for Q&A. And then the exciting part for today will be the visit to Mitchell's Plain. And I'll come back to that just now as well. So let me start with the introduction. While I was at Vodacom, we were building mobile networks, but we were reliant on transmission. In the early days, we could only buy transmission from one place, post office, then Telkom. And fortunately, there was somebody like Andile that had the vision. And 2006, there was the Electronic Communications Act, and there was a ministerial determination that made a new regulation where other companies could actually start providing fiber. And Remgro, the foresight, together with other shareholders like NewGX and CIVH, Joe Mandukandaba, got together and saw this as an opportunity. And they approached, I was on the other side at the time, saying to Vodacom, why don't we build your transmission lines for you? Why don't we cut out Telkom, skip the microwave links, we go straight to fiber? And they took me into the heart of Johannesburg. They had this big machine there that dug up the road. Caused chaos. The police were all over us for them demonstrating to me how this machine actually can dig up. But it was impressive. So it just, at walking pace, it runs down the street, digs a hole, puts the fiber in, closes it behind it, puts star on it. I don't know if they still use those machines, but it was very impressive. And I showed the video to Vodafone also, and they liked it, and we got the go-ahead, and that's how CIVH DFA was started. Vodacom became the anchor tenant. Then I had enough of Vodacom, and Yanni called and said, why don't you join the team down here in Stellenbosch? Always loved the mountains, and I will not soon move back again to the north. But the first thing was I got involved in DFA, and at that stage, DFA was just focused on the telcos. But looking at the bigger picture, transmission and telecommunications is more than just about the mobile networks. So we acquired a company called Conduct. I think you can see it there on the screen, and it was in 2014, where we said we need to diversify away from just the telcos. We need to go also into the businesses. There are so many enterprises in the country, and Conduct was one of those targets that we could identify that already established a footprint in to take fiber connectivity into corporates. So Conduct formed the hub of what became our FTTB business in the years to follow. Then something interesting happened. It was in May 2014. Parkhurst residents got together and they issued a tender for somebody to come and fiber up Parkhurst. We looked at this and said, probably not for us, and Vumatel was actually successful. They got the tender. And then we started sitting up and say, something's happening here. First time that residents in the suburbs putting down their own fiber. So I think the next one was later that year, November. There was another tender, Parkview. So we also tendered, got Parkview. We had no idea how to do it. So we bought another company soon thereafter, SADV, South African Digital Villages, that then became the hub of our fiber to the home initiative. But Vumatel, they were really aggressive. Entrepreneurs going flat out. Soon it was not just Parkhurst, but they were coloring the whole country pink. And we started having discussions with Niels Kuman. And eventually we decided it's better if we put all the fiber together. It's going to be better for everybody in the end if we have a bigger pool of fiber, because scale matters. And that's how the Vumatel deal came about. Then Vodacom, I'll come back to Vodacom to say where they fit in, but they're on the timescale there, and also Herotel. But this picture shows before Vodacom, before Herotel, where we actually are today. So if you add up all that fiber, it's 30,000 plus 13,000 kilometers of fiber. That's a lot of fiber. Graham, we probably invested north of 30 billion rand at cost into the network. 30 billion rand has gone into it. You don't just wake up one day and say, we're going to build a new fiber network and put 30 billion rand into the ground and onto poles. So what they've put together there is actually a meaningful network. It's 40,000 kilometers of fiber. And this covers metros. This covers footprint to the base stations, to the switches, to the residential areas. This is a really solid pool of fiber, a cloud of fiber that they have put together. In the middle today, in my view, they are the clear market leader. I don't know where the stats come from, but almost 40% of homes passed comes from Vumatel. Probably 40% of all the homes passed that are connected also comes from Vumatel. So they've done really well. Andries has a dual role in the business. He's currently inside FiberCo, also the CEO of DFA, while we're busy integrating the two businesses. So Andries will talk a lot about DFA later on. Dietlof was the CEO of Vumatel when we acquired it. We've now pushed him into this future role of CEO of the combined FiberCo. Better get a better name for that, Dietlof. But for now, we call it FiberCo. And then once that is all working and Andries has done his job there, we've got another job for him later on, and I'll tell you about it just now. But Vumatel must be passing, is it on the slide, 1.5 million homes today? Must be, yeah. But I won't steal your thunder. The next slide. So then we had the vision, we're connecting the telcos, we're connecting businesses, FTTB, connecting homes, FTTH. So what else can we do? Fiber is adjacent to many other ICT infrastructure plays in the industry. So we looked at enterprise data centers. And the reason why we looked at it is, with our fiber networks, you don't just take a fiber from somewhere in Cape Town city centre and push it all the way through to Stellenbosch. You have also little small data centers where you can put stuff into it. And that's where the idea came from. Maybe we can play a role in edge data centers. So those of you that will be going with this afternoon, you'll see one of those containers that can become a distributed data center. I'm sure you're going to take us there. It's very impressive. Then Spectrum, there was the one. Andries must be the world-leading CTO. By the way, he was in Vodafone Group. Andries, you were rated the best CTO? Yes. So if we ever have the opportunity to go into Spectrum and radio business, we have the world's best radio guy here. Unfortunately for now, they've paused the one. I don't know if they're ever going to wake it up again. But so those first two, we said, let's just keep an eye on them. Towers and geographic expansion. That's a little bit more real-time, a little bit more exciting. Towers, and again, Andries will tell you more. We've always known that 5G will come. And 5G, higher frequencies, you'll have to densify it. You can only get more capacity in the radio network if you build more towers. So again, the guys at Vumatel had the vision to actually start building towers. So they've sneakily built some towers throughout the whole of Joburg. There must be 3,000 of these poles that are mobile base station ready. Andries says they are. But that can be then used. They've got power now. They've got fiber. They've got a little box where you can put equipment. The new base stations that's got the smaller footprint are so small, they're like a Wi-Fi router. They can all fit into them. So those poles can be monetized at some point. And then geographic expansion. So Andries, I don't know if I've told you this, but that's where you're going next. We're going to, once he's done his job at DFA, we're going to get Andries to head up our African expansion footprint. So well done, Andries. My next slide also makes me really excited. So if you just look at video, everybody who watches video in some form, being TV or YouTube or Netflix, Walt Disney Plus, there's just so much happening in the video space. Video is driving. Now each hour of just normal HD, I'm not talking even 4K, 1 hour of HD video must be a gigabyte of data. That's a lot of data. So if you have to stream your videos over a mobile network, it just can't work. There's just not enough spectrum in the world. We can't go to the hardware store and buy more spectrum, but you can buy more fiber. And that's why I believe that fiber is the only long-term solution to feed this demand for data, for video. Just look at the penetration on this slide, mobile penetration versus fiber, homes connected. There's a huge opportunity, and that's why we don't just see it as South Africa. We see it across the wider continent. The same demand is there. People want video. On the right-hand side, you see some of the stuff happening. Cars. My car's got a SIM card in it. I don't know where it is, but it's got a SIM card. So Carl was driving behind me yesterday. We were driving here. And my car said to me, go to the left lane. There's a puddle of water. There's something wrong in the right-hand side lane. Carl couldn't believe, how did I know to go to the left lane? But that's what's going to happen. Your car's intelligent. It tells you what's happening around you. It's not future stuff. It is there. All cars will have SIM cards. So data is not about voice anymore. It's all about data going forward. And I call this my passion slide. This is really, when I was at Vodacom, I truly, with Alan, believe that mobile phones can democratize communications. And that's what we did back in the day. And now I have the same vision and belief that fiber can democratize the internet. Just look at COVID now. How unfair was it not that some kids could continue having school, learning on YouTube, where the masses couldn't do anything. They couldn't afford data. They couldn't get access to data. That's not fair. We need to change something. You can't have capped data with the internet where it is today. You need to have uncapped. But to do that, you really need scale. You really need lots of fiber to connect everybody. And this is our vision. And Ditlof he can get very passionate, but he will get excited later on and go and show you this. Because where you're going this afternoon, if you have the chance, and if it's not raining, just go into some of those houses in Mitchell's Plain. When I first went in there, so these are small houses. They're not like Stanton. We have 40 meters in front of the house. And that's what makes building a fiber network in Stanton expensive. Whereas in Mitchell's Plain, you have 5 to 10 meters for the house frontage. So it's a lot cheaper to build it. But when you go into that house, there are many, many more people living in that house than in Stanton. So let's take Stanton, probably 370 gigabytes of data a month. What do you think Mitchell's Plain is pushing through one of those homes? A lot more, 100 gigs more per home per month in Mitchell's Plain. Just shows you. So when you have the chance today, go into those houses. Go and meet the person there. Because when I went into my first house, and I think, Jannie, you were also there, there's a granny sitting there watching Netflix. She's got this smart TV. She knows all about it, streaming her Netflix. You get to the back room. The dad is set up his studio there. He is broadcasting live school lectures, math classes in the afternoon. The kids are all in the house on YouTube. Now, isn't that amazing? Isn't that about democratizing the internet? And that's the vision I have. Not to connect the 2 million homes in Sandton, but to eventually connect 16 million homes, past 16 million homes, and connect as many of them. This is all possible. But at an affordable rate, why don't we target for those areas to bring the tariff to below 100 Rand a month? Not for 300 gigabytes, uncapped, as much as they can eat in that little house. That's what you have to do, Ditlof. And then maybe we've got good experience about Africa between Andries and Ditlof. Andries as the CTO and Ditlof as the person on the ground. By the way, what's also magic about this is not about just giving uncapped internet. It's also how you deliver it in the end. And again, we've stolen the ideas from Vodacom and Vodafone. So Ditlof did a lot of work to bring the mobile data model into fiber. So today we have prepaid fiber. Remember prepaid data? You still get it? Yes. But today you can buy prepaid data on a fiber in these townships. And it's not going to stop at Mitchell's Plain. You're going to tell us, we want to take this into Alex. Every dwelling in Alex must get a connection. For below 100 Rand a month, uncapped, eat as much as you want. But I'm talking too much. So let me tell you a little bit quickly about Vodacom and where they fit into it. Jannie mentioned partnerships, and it is all about partnerships. We looked around, and we're still looking around. I mentioned scale. We do need scale. If you can get scale, that's how you can eventually get to 100 Rand uncapped internet. You can't do it. You need to have a 30 billion Rand network. You need to make it even bigger. Otherwise, you will never be able to get down to those tariff levels. So Vodacom, they bring also skills. We don't know everything. They have Vodafone as shareholder, and I remember they have good ideas. You don't have to listen to everything they say, but they have some good ideas. So we'll take all the good ideas, and they'll take some of our ideas. They also bring a balance sheet. Fiber is expensive. They're going to put money into the company, and it will unlock more debt capacity. So this vision, we don't have to wait 5, 10 years. With a partner like Vodacom, we can actually fast forward that vision and do it in the next couple of years and connect the whole of Alex. The transaction, this is just an overview of what it looks like. This is not the final picture. They're going to put at least 6 billion rand into the business. They will, CIVH or FiberCo, will buy 90% of all their fiber except for the long-distance fibers. That means their fiber in the metros, it means their fiber to the business, fiber to the homes. And that's what's so nice about this transaction. There's a lot of closed fiber sitting there. We have an open access wholesale model. So we're taking the closed fiber assets inside Vodacom and we're opening it up to the market. Suddenly multiplying the access. Suddenly it is much quicker to connect the rest of the country. So yes, they bring the balance sheet, but they bring expertise and they bring fiber. The deal is structured in such a way that it's difficult to figure out how much money they're going to put in at the moment because it's a future value transaction based on Ebitda multiples. So when Comcom and ICASA finally approves it, there's a formula that we'll use then, and that will determine the final valuation that they will subscribe for shares, that we're buying the assets for shares, and also how much money they'll eventually put in. But Neville, I think there will be enough that we'll declare a special dividend also for you at the time. But a big chunk of that can then be used to de-gear the business and just free up more capacity. But there will be, by the way, I mentioned 70,000 homes that they passed last month. Even if I give them another 1 billion rand, there's just not enough shovels in the country to build, suddenly double that in number. It's difficult to get to those numbers. It took years to get to a position to pass 70,000 homes in a month. So it's not just about the money. It is also about how you actually do it. And that's why we're also starting to use aerial fiber, because it is sometimes quicker, and in certain areas, it is better than other areas. Then this is what it will look like. Vodacom's got a stated intention to have at least 30% in the business because that buys them some shareholder rights. They'll have the same rights that CIVH will have because we're also above 30%. They will not control the business. It will be joint control through a shareholders agreement, and they will have certain rights through that. But they do not have control, so they can't come in and change anything in the business. We are going to be equal partners. Let me just again mention some of our partners there at the top. New GX, the main guy there is Kudu, and that's where Graham's come from. Kudu Pichi, he's also got lots of other investments, but he shares the same passion that I have for fiber and where we can take this business. So we have a very strong relationship at a shareholder level. And then CIH, that's actually where the name came from. If you might have wondered where did this CIVH silly name come from. It is CIH who helped with the initial funding and became a ventures business. So DFA was a ventures business underneath CIH, and they called it Community Investment Ventures Holdings or something like that. And that's where the name comes from. The person there is Joe Mandungandaba. Can you say that? I had to practice all morning. Then just the regulatory approvals. There are two processes running in parallel. ICASA, because we're a licensed entity, we can't just do whatever we want. If we change shareholding, they have to approve it. And then there's Comcom. ICASA's process is more or less closed now. Everybody had to put in objections. I don't think there were many major issues. So the ICASA process, I'm confident that will go through speedily. Naya, is it true?
It's ongoing.
She always says it's ongoing. Then on the Comcom side, it's a little bit more involved, lots more interested parties. I haven't seen anything that's concerning me because in the end, it is a good news story. We are giving something to the customers. It's a win-win story. It's a win for CIVH. It's a win for Vodacom. It's a win for the customers. We're taking those closed fibers. We're scaling up the network. it will become more affordable. We will do that 100 Rand a month. So for me, there's a very positive story on this. Herotel, I'm not going to say a lot about it. Again, we are in a ComCom process now. I won't say anything. But Herotel gives us that footprint if eventually we get approval for it. We now have 48% of Herotel, not controlling it. But they have focused on secondary cities and towns, and they have a presence in more than 500 of those cities and towns. And they're doing wireless, they're doing mostly fiber at the moment. So it's a perfect fit. If we can add that to this fiber cloud in the middle, we can really extend and get this good news story also to more rural areas. I'm not going to spend time on this. I want to get to Dietlof as soon as possible. So this is just a structure, a future structure. I've made the Vodacom deal dimmed because it's subject to approval. Herotel, the 48% is done. We are a 48% financial investor in Herotel in the ComCom process. And then Andres, I don't know if you've seen the slide, but that's where you're going, into that block on the side. But again, that's where a Vodacom partnership could really help, because they all over Africa, like Dietlof and Andres, they've learned how to do magic in Africa. And I really believe that the next wave for democratizing the internet in Africa must be through fiber. So I really believe with the right partner, such as the Vodacom, we can quickly replicate this good news story. But Dietlof, this is your chance. So I'm going to give you the clicker.
Thanks, Peter. So, yes, I want to talk a little bit about connecting South Africa, but I think Peter spoke about a few things already, but I think it's not just connecting South Africa, it's connecting the world in a way. You know, you're looking at a connected world today, and it's not closing a digital divide or getting access to just people. If South Africa wants to compete with the world, we have to connect. And I can remember in the early 2000s, when we launched the first network in the Congo, you know, we skipped technologies. We never had fax machines working. We never had letters going. There was no postal services in Congo. And people couldn't do business in the Congo. And suddenly we brought in SMS and then MMS, remember? And then suddenly Europe realized, listen, Congo is not that dark. I mean, we can actually do business. And suddenly people started communicating, and that built. And I actually thought at that point that we closed the digital divide between Africa and the world. But what happened now is, because if you look at investments going into Africa, it's lagging behind because the regulators just issued too many licenses, and suddenly predator pricing came in too quick. And if you look at the technology advancements within Africa, that gap is actually increasing. So what they say is by 2030, the gap might even be bigger from a digital divide point of view, Africa world, than it was in the early 2000s. And I think that's the challenge we're sitting with today, is how do we continue developing infrastructure, connecting people, making sure South Africa or Africa can connect with the rest of the world. Because things are just going to happen faster. And you cannot do that on a scarce resource. You can't do it on a spectrum. You can only do that through a convergence between the two technologies. And I think that's what we're talking about. So it's not connecting South Africa, it's connecting the people to the rest of the world. Businesses will be done a little bit differently in future. So the opportunity for us is twofold. I mean, we're sitting with a super unpenetrated market at this point. We've got 17.6 million homes. We've got very bad copper infrastructure that can't accommodate this, that can't create this gap close. And we're sitting there in the middle of this with the biggest access network and the biggest network that can connect homes or can connect the end consumer. So for me, we started a few years ago just with the 2.2 million homes in the core networks. Because remember, we didn't have access to millions and billions of capital. We started an entrepreneurial company, and we decided, listen, let's go to the high LSM suburbs, the Parkhursts, the Bryanstons. That's everybody that earns more than 30,000 Rand a month. And we said, listen, let's do that, and we rolled it out. We started, after conduct, we went from business, we went into fiber to the home, and suddenly we just saw, listen, but it is possible. You can actually compete with the big players and the big copper players in the markets. And suddenly the uptake worked and we started just rolling that out. But we still focused only on the high LSMs because we could never in our minds get a solution of rolling this out into the lower LSM areas because it was just impossible. You had this unofficial forums working there. It was very difficult. You have gangsters closing the businesses now and then. So it was just for us not possible. And then we sat down and we decided one day, listen, why don't we launch a prepaid? Because we also had a debt collection risk problem on that side. So we decided to say, listen, why don't we try and replicate the prepaid model that Vodacom South Africa actually started in the world? Why don't we replicate this into the fiber to the home model? And we were one of the first companies in the world to do fiber to the home on a prepaid model. And that was the trick. Then, because we are a purpose-based organization, we are a purpose-based group, we change communities, we change what we do in South Africa, we change lives. Suddenly we use the community model to actually go and change the lives. And we picked Mitchell's Plain. We said, Mitchell's Plain, guys, why do we pick Mitchell's Plain? Because Mitchell's Plain, we thought, was one of the toughest areas to do because, I mean, very high gang-related activity. And we thought, listen, if we can do it in Mitchell's, we can do it anywhere. And suddenly, we struggled. In the beginning, they stopped us in a few places, but we continued. But the trick was then, at the end of the day, and the success was the community buy-in. So we created a community purpose base in line with the values of the group. And we created this in those communities where the people became the promoters of the product. And the people actually then started building the networks. So we reduced our headcount from 800 people to 380 at this point, just because we're doing it through community-based type of organizations. And Peter is 100% right. In the beginning, we could maximum build 70,000 homes a year. Now we're building 60, 70,000 a month. A little bit different technologies, but we had to get there. And for me, the critical thing is it's bridging the digital divide, but it's tying South Africa up through connectivity with the rest of the world for us to compete. And I think that's the challenge. And you know, I've seen a lot of solutions in areas like this, and it's normally not a feasible, sustainable solution. It's Wi-Fi meshes. It's a solution that's inferior from a quality point of view. And I think a key driver for us as a company and an organization was to give a solution in these areas that is world-class, that competes with the Parkhursts and the Santons of the world. And I think that's a very critical thing because disposable income in these areas are less than obviously what you see in Parkhurst and Santon. But what we do see is we've got 425 megs going through on throughputs because there's 7, 8, 10 devices live in homes in Mitchell's. And people are, weekends, they keep the kids in the homes because it's unsafe outside. So what you're seeing is your usage is increasing. And we had a discussion the other day, the buying decision is made by the kids because the kids are starting to study from them. You're seeing UCT launching the virtual schools linked to the universities. So why should kids still climb into 3 taxis to get to a school if they can do it from home? And by 2030, that's going to be a reality. The way we study, the way we work, the way we build our businesses, the way we compete with the rest of the world is all linked to this. And we're sitting with the 2 biggest assets in South Africa to actually consolidate this. So the 2.2 million, for me, that's the key thing. We got 4.8 million in the reach where we started in Mitchell's Plain. We've got nearly 1 million homes in that area now. And then we got the 9.7 million homes. That is really, really the low LSM. This is the households that earn less than 5,000 rand a month. And that's the area where we have to, if we really want to penetrate this, we have to do well in these areas. But I want to show you a quick video just on Mitchell's and the impact that we as a group make in these communities.
All right. So just stand. Yeah, look at that camera for me.
I am wherever you choose to see.
I could be your neighbor, a stranger, or the most reviled segment of your society.
I am whoever you choose to see. I could be an alien, a drain, or a precious resource, maybe a person in greater need. I am whoever you choose to see. A lazy native, a wishful migrant,
Or maybe a person in great need.
I am whomever you choose to see. More than a color.
I could be the most critical piece of our democracy. I am whoever I choose to be.
I would like to make everybody smile, the whole entire world smile at one time and happy at the same time.
And one day I'm going to create a legacy that my children can be proud of.
My dream is to go big and achieve what is not achievable in my community.
I am so happy that I met David because I'm learning to know myself.
I started with IPFI and then my life just changed.
I think anybody would long for is that Mrs. Fiber, APR and Red Dot, they give us the opportunity to do what we do today. And that's really an excitement thing and really upliftment thing to see that we can also put bread on somebody else's table.
For me, community means people coming together.
I really know the meaning of being happy. And what I do, I am happy with what I'm doing. So Mitchell's Fiber, IPFI, changed my life completely.
And I had no idea that my whole entire life was going to change the way it did.
So this project is going to it's going to open multiple opportunities for not just our youth, but even our preteens to, and I mean our primary school kids to be exposed to so much more that I suppose first world countries are used to, which is a normal day-to-day thing. Now our kids, have that opportunity as well. And so, so that we are very excited about this technology coming to us.
I think that is the most exciting part of this whole project, that we, one of the first townships in South Africa, will have access to internet at our doorsteps.
No words can describe the experiences and how they treat you as a human, and it's just overwhelming and yeah. Pleasure, man. Yeah, so good.
And I think that's the purpose. I mean, that makes coming to work and working easy, and I think that's what we as a group stand for. That, and I think we are changing it. So we took it from Mitchells, we took it into Soweto, we got 80,000 homes in Soweto, we got Soshanguve, we got Phoenix, Chatsworth, across 1 million homes in the low LSM areas covered. But more opportunities for us is coming because we're still sitting with only 3.6 million homes if you look at the market size in the whole of South Africa passed. So we're looking at 16.7 million. So you've got 13 million homes that we have to get solutions, technology solutions for to actually pass those homes. And it becomes more difficult because you don't want to go give away on quality. The quality has to be there. Your throughputs have to be there. It must be a data in abundance. So your speeds mustn't be restricted and it must be uncapped. And we built this on an open access model. So all the ISPs that actually sell services on top of these layers are absolutely enabled to sell services on it. But we're also creating small little localized ISPs within these communities where people start their own little businesses because it's more localized data centers to the edge where people keep the information closer to where it's being utilized. So really, I think the current uptake is about 45% of total homes passed in the market. But if you see that when you build 70 or 60,000 homes a year, we've built 1 million homes over the last 2 years. I mean, that uptake obviously goes a little bit down, and it takes time to actually get the uptake up over time. So for me, really, 13 million homes still available. I think that's where the opportunity is. And then, of course, on top of that, there's other stuff that come from a business point of view. So you're seeing much more small, medium enterprises actually coming up in these local areas. We're seeing call centers. They built the first call center now in Mitchells Plain, where people can localize. They travel to the call center because there's connectivity. So I think that's what you'll see coming forward in the near future, and we're pushing that. So definitely on commercial businesses, you're looking at 460,000 homes passed. There's only a 25% uptake, but there's about 400,000 homes that we can still connect through the small SME type of markets. What we're also seeing is that the whole model after COVID is changing. People has to be connected. Doesn't matter if you're at the office or at work. You have to stay connected. You have to Zoom. So suddenly asymmetrical rates is just totally cancelled. The norm is now symmetrical rates. So up and down speeds, because of the videos that has to happen, is has to be aligned. And it's very difficult to do that on a scarce resource, on a spectrum type of solution. So that's where the fiber comes into play. But things are changing, and it's changing faster than we thought. Within 2 years, the whole business model's changed. People linking an office with a house is going to be the norm in a few years from now. And it should be seamless. And that goes into data security, how people actually protect their networks. That's the norm. And we are the asset that can actually achieve that in South Africa, or enable that in South Africa. So yes, fiber to the tower, I think that's how DFA started. We chased the towers, we connected all, or 50% of all the towers in South Africa, but there's still huge opportunities if you look at what's going to happen with 5G. So we see 5G as a huge opportunity for us, because convergence will go with 5G. 5G will absolutely drive the small cell deployment. I mean, connected devices, cars, has to be all over the place, and that absolutely enables the fiber assets to actually play their role in this market. So Andries will talk a little bit about that as well. But this is the next opportunity. This is the next 9.6 million homes. We haven't cracked it yet. So if you look at the key areas, this is the informal areas. We've tested it now in Alex for the first time, and it's a quality service. A little bit contended, but uncapped fiber. So we're seeing people using 3-4 gigs a day in places like Alex at this point. But it's still in a pilot phase, but that's what we have to get right. That's what Dewald and the ops teams and the company has to get right, because this is the next layer of success within in our mission or vision to connect South Africa with the world. So easy, I mean, fiber network operators, we're looking at the fiber business model, fiber to the home, fiber to the business. We got fiber to the tower, and then there's the additional other services, where you can bring the data centers closer. There's adjacent areas where we can develop, because fiber and that connectivity has to work. And we have to do it at an affordable place at super quality. And I think that's the challenge for us. So that's where we're positioning ourselves. We're putting ourselves as a single integrated fiber network within this arena of play, with having the biggest access network from a DFA, Conduct, Vuma, Herotel point of view, and then a biggest core network in South Africa from a DFA point of view. And the thing is, how do we combine these two assets to create something super special? And honestly, one of the reasons why we're so successful is we had fantastic shareholders from the beginning. We had access to capital. We could deploy at speed, and we could scale. That's it. And we could make the business model profitable. And that's the model. And we did it on an open access model, and we did it with uncapped services, which no mobile operator could do. And that was the differentiators. And we did it with a very small core team of people that I believe is just world class. And that's why I believe if we go into Africa, I think we have the knowledge and the know-how how to do that. So, overview of the network, we got 1.4 million, actually 1.5 million homes at this point. 34% uptake, a little bit lower than the benchmark because a lot of the other operators were not building at scale over the last year. We've built 1 million homes of that 1.4 million over the last 2 years. And you see that uptake coming over. But ticking over, if you look at my older adopted areas in Parkhurst, 84% penetrated at this point. If you look at network over 4 years, 52% penetrated. So the business model makes total sense. And we're looking at a bench, if you look at our business cases, about a 65% penetration on average. That makes it super feasible for us to build networks. And then I'm going to hand over to Andries just to go through the fiber to the business and fiber to the...
Thanks, Dietlof. Yeah, let me start. I'll start on the fiber to the tower side or fiber to the site side. And I think it has come out this morning where we said when the mobile operators or the market opened in 2006, 2007, and other companies were allowed to provide fiber. And if you looked at that time, Telkom was a shareholder in Vodacom. So it was a tricky discussion with them because they were the ones who was allowed to provide fiber. We had to go and prove to them that we can do it efficiently or more cost efficiently. And at that time, they just refused to change their business model. So that is where it actually started. That's where the DFAs of this world started, is looking at the mobile operators or providing services to the mobile operators. It also started from the big pipes, the metro rings, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the products now, but those big pipes and working outside or inside out.
And when the networks were designed at that time, although they wanted to pick up switching sites, they wanted to pick up data centers or connect data centers or switching sites, the routes were designed in such a way that in future, if there was a business case for towers and you wanted to expand to towers, you could do that cost efficiently. So the point about that is the route wasn't always the shortest route. It was, a route that picks up base stations, that picks up sites. Today, if we look at the big mobile operators, the Vodacoms of this world, the MTNs of this world in South Africa, they've only connected 50% of their base stations. And the base station connectivity, if we look at the competition for the CIVH group, there's no one in terms of fiber except the mobile operators themselves. So we're competing with the self-build, them building base stations or connectivity to base stations themselves. So on the back of, so we've got 20,000 sites connected on the DFA network. That's mobile sites, towers, sites or connectivity to wireless internet service providers, etc. If I then come to the FTTB, at the moment or today, the DFA network passes 297,000 premises within 1 kilometer from the premise or from the network. Of course, sometimes that is a challenge where you can't connect a building that's a kilometer away for a low ARPU service. So we are focusing on bringing down the cost of deployment, as an example. And most of the DFA network is trenched, it's underground, it's in the roads. But if you look at mobile operators, they use a lot of aerial to connect businesses or to connect their towers. So the reality is they can do that. We can also provide that service. If that aerial is good enough for them, why is aerial not good enough for the rest? So the point is to expand, make sure that we can bring down the cost to connect those buildings. Peter referred to the Vodacom transaction. If I look at the Vodacom transaction, and Peter also referred to the assets that are coming into the CIVH group, the 297 increases by 30% as soon as the Vodacom assets lands inside CIVH. And that 30% is not overlapped. That 30% is unique businesses, which is not passed by the DFA network. So overnight, with that increases by 30%. Interesting about the 297, about 2/3 of that is in big cities, Cape Town, Joburg, Durban, and Pretoria. And 1/3 is in more rural areas or smaller towns. The Vodacom assets are quite complementary to that, and it's because the DFAs at that time could not cost effectively build the networks. They built it themselves, and they built it in the more smaller towns and areas. At the moment, DFA connects 22,000 premises, commercial premises. Over and above that, 25,000 buildings are within, and that's the way we classify it, we call them near net, are within 5 meters from the outside network of DFA. We can cost effectively connect any of the 25,000 near net buildings for any of the products that we sell, even the lowest ARPU products. So the point is, if someone wants to buy a broadband service, a 10 megabits per second broadband service into a near net building, we can cost effectively connect that. At the moment, we have about close to 14,000 kilometers of fiber in the public domain. Interesting stat, perhaps for some people, is we have about 1,100, 1,200 kilometers of fiber in private domains. So that's reticulation into malls, into office parks, etc. Just to look at some of the products, I'm not going to touch on the FTTH because Dietlof and Peter has said enough about that, but just some of the products. And as I said, where did the mobile operators start? They started with building outside in. They wanted to connect big cities. At that time, telecom was just not cost effective, and that's where it started. They built, so DFA has some long haul, connecting undersea cable stations to big data centers in the metros. At the moment, we have 2 products that services that, and we classify it as lit and dark. I was told not to try and explain it, but maybe I just quickly. Dark means you provide fiber to a customer, and that's all you provide. You provide the fiber to the customer. The customer then has to put its own equipment on either side of the fiber to transmit information through the fiber. The lit products is where DFA and Vuma provides the end user or the equipment as well. And why they say lit physically, because there's a little light or multiple lights that you shine through the fiber to provide lit products. And there are benefits to customers. Some of them prefer dark, some of them prefer lit. If I just look at, and I'll touch on a few of these products that might be interesting. A clip, or if let me start with Peregrine long haul. Their customers can either buy 5-year, 10-year, or 15-year terms or leases. Between Peregrine long haul and Peregrine metro, more or less the same thing. Metro is just in metros, fiber rings and metros, and long haul fiber rings between town, cities, undersea cable. 50% of our Peregrine products are on 15-year leases, and the 50% other is on 5 and 10 years. Except Peregrine Metro, and Peregrine Metro, we also provide the option of 1 to 5 years, then 10, then 15. Peregrine is also distance-based, so customers pay based on the distance, the length of the fiber. How long is that trench? If I look at Calypti, the thing about Calypti is it is also bandwidth-based. So if you buy a 100 megabits per second service versus 200 versus a gig, of course a customer will pay more. And as traffic increases, those speeds are going to increase, and customers would want to buy higher throughput or higher bandwidth capacity. Tachyon, and Peter also referred to adjacencies or data centers or edge data centers. The DFA Tachyon product is a product where we allow customers to host equipment, co-locate equipment. So we have these nodes, and there are 120 of these nodes in South Africa in major metros, and our customers are allowed to provide or to install equipment on those nodes. And for those who are interested, so we are quite modular. They can buy a third rack, half rack, or full rack. So they pay for the co-location space. I've spoken a little bit about metro, so I won't discuss that any further. And then if we look at the tower infrastructure, what products do we provide for base station towers? We provide a lit service. We call it the Magellan service. Typically, that's about 1 gigabits per second throughput that mobile operators buy, but we can go up. We can go to 10 or 100 gigabits per second. I think it's important, so we can talk a lot about what bandwidths we provide and services, up to 100 or 10 gigs or 1 gigs, but that is not dependent on the fiber. The fiber in the ground does not determine the throughput. It's the equipment on the end. So the point with that is, if you upgrade the network, all you need to do is upgrade the equipment side of things and not the fiber network. So Magellan is typically for towers and then also connecting businesses. And we call that our quality of service product. And we have SLAs associated with that, specific 4 hours mean time to repair. If the service goes down, of course, businesses want to be up. And then also on Magellan, the contention ratios are much lower than on the rest of, or for instance, the broadband network, meaning people can be guaranteed or customers can be guaranteed a specific service. Broadband, so our Magellan service is the underlying technology, not that important, but that's for those who want to know, Metro Ethernet, and then the broadband service is a GPON service. And how that is differentiated from FTTH is that the contention ratios on the broadband service, the FTTB broadband service, is not as high as on the FTTH network. Then Helios is a dark fiber product into business or buildings, and we are seeing significant growth in Helios as well. Just how we started, and I think it's a little bit of a repeat, is connecting cities, connecting data centers, connecting landing stations, undersea cable landing stations. One thing I did not mention on the previous slide is in the next 2 to 3 years, there is a huge amount of undersea cable capacity landing in South Africa. It's Equihano, funded by Google. There is Facebook to Africa cable, to Africa East, to Africa West. Those cables will land 338 terabits per second, additional capacity into South Africa in the next 2 years, 2 to 3 years. So that is massive. That is really massive. So, and then that's how it expanded. So we started with long haul, then it's the metro rings, because that was the next area for mobile operators to focus on. The best business cases are metro rings. And then we expanded. And that allowed, on the back of the DFA network, Vumatel to expand its footprint and increase density. And Dietlof has spoken to us about how Vumatel then is expanding into reach into key areas. And then more or less the same story as we started in metros, rolling out in metros. And as you roll out, it gives you, the network gets closer to the next area and gets closer to the next area. So as you roll out, it becomes more cheaper and more cost efficient to then connect the rest of the network. So you can hear from what Dietlof has said is we don't want to leave anyone behind, nobody behind. We want to connect the entire country either via the DFA network or the Vuma network. And the DFA network is there to support FNOs like Vuma, WISPs, wireless internet service providers, and mobile operators. If I just look at the DFA side of the business, and I'll be very surprised if no one is going to ask whether 5G is better than fiber or fiber better than 5G. And we have the answers for that. The nice thing about the DFA side of the business, it doesn't really matter because DFA gets the benefit. Whether the mobile traffic comes from the mobile base station or a WISP, or the traffic comes from a fixed network, the DFA benefits from that. Especially on the long haul, the Peregrine, Calypti, and those products and services. Talk a little bit about 5G, but before I talk about 5G, I'll say something about 4G as well. If we look at South Africa, at the moment, not all the base stations in South Africa have 4G on those base stations. And it's largely because of the lack of spectrum. Now, spectrum has always been a discussion topic in South Africa, and let me say a little bit about that. Vodacom and MTN received spectrum in 2004, and they received spectrum again in 2022. 2022, that is a significant number of years where Vodacom and MTN and the rest of the industry was starved of spectrum. 4G was launched in 2012. Normally, when you launch a new mobile technology, you are supposed to, in theory, you are supposed to get additional spectrum because there's a lot of traffic. So for instance, as an example, 2G, 3G traffic on the spectrum. So when you want to launch 4G, you get additional spectrum and you can add the capacity there and you can move traffic there. What the Vodacoms and the MTNs of this world had to do is they had to reform spectrum. So they had to take away spectrum from 2G, take away spectrum from 3G, and give that to 4G. At least there was a 4G service. But the problem is there were so many 2G and 3G devices, and still are, that if you did too much of that, you would mess up the quality of the network. Now, so why do I say that? Is now that they have 4G spectrum, that capacity is there. And just remember, is if the base station gets additional throughput or capacity, of course the backhaul also has to get that. It's no use you have it here and then there are capacity constraints on the backhaul. So the fact that the mobile operators received 4G spectrum and they also received or bought, paid a lot for it, that they received spectrum immediately says there will be more capacity on the air interface, meaning more requirement or backhaul. As I said, at the moment, only 50% of the base station are connected by fiber. I suspect over the next year or two, if you look at the 4G penetration population coverage, that will increase significantly, requiring more backhaul capacity. If I then just look at 4G and 5G, in the auction, mobile operators also received 5G spectrum. And again, 5G spectrum, there's a lot of it, and the technology works better, it was faster. So the more we roll out 5G, or the more the mobile operators roll out 5G, greater requirement for backhaul. Their strategy will start, and that's how it has started, or how they roll out. They roll it out on the existing macro base stations. So now you have 5G there, you have more 4G there, you have more spectrum there. So the requirements, the backhaul requirements just increases significantly. So they will roll out on their macro base stations first, and then they will build these smaller infill base stations, and I think, we were small macros, so they build small macros. And then if we get to 2031, and that is where Pieter and Dietlof also spoke a little bit about site densification, and it happens for 2 or 3 reasons. Number one is for capacity reasons, and a lot of people, and I don't know whether you follow that, talk about small cells. If we look at small cells and we make certain assumptions, and our assumptions are quite conservative, to say that there will be 1 small cell for every 3 to 4 macro base stations, the number of base stations will double in the next 9 or 10 years. Will actually double. So a huge opportunity to connect. So you will get smaller and smaller cells to carry the capacity, and as well as the fact that the spectrum, it's higher frequencies, and when you transmit on higher frequencies, the coverage is smaller, and you need more of these base stations to provide coverage. So it's capacity driven, and it is sort of spectrum coverage driven that will drive small cells in South Africa. This is my last slide, and I think it came out of the present. It doesn't matter whether we are going to connect devices, cars, mobile phones. It doesn't matter whether that's in building, metros, or just moving between buildings, moving in cities, moving on roads, moving on freeways. But this fiber network will have to expand and expand and expand to support all of these new technologies. Thanks. Thanks, Pieter.
So, thanks, Andries. So we're going to ask Graham now to tell us a little bit, give us more detail about some of the financial numbers. But just to explain, so I mentioned Byron there at the back. Are you still awake, Byron? So Byron is going to be with Dietlof. So Dietlof's going to be the CEO of Fiberco, and then Byron's going to be his CFO. But today we're looking at a higher level. So I've asked Graham to just talk much more high level, and especially focus a little bit, because if I listen to this, just listen to Andries' products and services and all the different combinations that you can have, it must be very difficult to value this business. So if you can also hone in, just to give some signals, how would you value a business such as this? Thanks, Graham.
Perfect. Thank you. So fundamentally, we believe that infrastructure is the backbone for economic growth. We've spent the past 15 years deploying fiber networks, digital infrastructure. We spent over 30 billion rand. We see a lot more opportunity. It doesn't end there. We currently have a carrying value of about 21.5 billion rand on our asset value. We can see a further 10 billion at least in the next 5 years, excluding any acquisitions or further assets. So we have a long road ahead of us still. We are not done. And one of the key points that everyone's been talking about is densification. So fiber at its heart is a point-to-point technology. You've got to connect 2 points to each other to kind of get it to work. As the networks densify, everything gets closer. So your build distance decreases. So when we look at it, as our network has got to 44,000 kilometers, our build distance to connect the next party decreases. Right? So when you get to the various products, it's always important to understand that network densification. So when Andries talks about 5G, we talk about small cells. Now, small cells start filling the network even further. And Andries also mentioned we've got 25,000 businesses within 5 meters of our network. Obviously, again, you put another small cell, you add more businesses closer to you. So that distance parameter is very important. So we're going to give you a quick financial snapshot of CIVH as a whole. We talk about DFA and Vumatel being our major opcos. They have structures underneath them. DFA to a large degree, has been supported by the need for mobile backhaul over the pandemic years, if we call it that. But it is very well positioned coming out of COVID with everyone starting to head back to the business premises. And as they head back, we're starting to see demand come through for our other products. On the Vuma side, we'll talk about it now with the ratios, but we talk about uptake curves. And really what we start to look at is we look at cumulative subscribers on a network. So if we pass 1.4 million homes, we've only connected 33% of those. So a big driver in our value proposition is actually that uptake curve increasing. And Vumatel's seeing that uptake curve on our core market, which is our oldest market, improve significantly, as well as our reach product, which is our mid to lower LSM product. We're seeing our uptake curve being higher and faster than our core product was, which is, to the Ditlof's point again, around the demand for data. From a discontinued operations side, we obviously, in a growing enterprise, we're always rationalizing. We acquired SADV, which had a series of fiber to the home assets and fiber to the business assets. All we've done is sold it into DFA and Vuma. We've sold the VoIP assets, which is not part of our core network operations, to third parties. And then we had made an initial investment into the IoT sector. We were running the network for an IoT. We're just actually in the process of relaunching that. And what we're doing is we're actually bringing our customers into the investment vehicle with us. So we talked about partnerships. Those partnerships are critical. This is still early stage technology, but we're seeing big demand from stolen vehicle recovery, water meters, and the like. So overall, I think from a CIVH perspective, we were happy with the EBITDA level growth. We moved 700 million in EBITDA for the year. I think coming down, all we wanted to demonstrate with headline earnings is that for the first time, our two major opcos are positive. This is a big thing. We've been in this asset for 15 years, right? So we are really starting to now experience the growth behind this engine. 30 billion of assets, 21 billion of carrying value, showing the youth of the network. This is an exciting time. 33% uptake. We moved to 65% uptake with zero capex. This is when this business starts to move. So over the last year, Ditlof talked about adding 1 million homes. We've spent 6.7 billion of capex, predominantly in the FTTH space, predominantly in the reach or the mid to lower LSM band. And what is really positive is that in 22, at least 2 billion of that capex was actually funded through our own internally generated cash flow. All right, so I think Peter alluded to this, but really what we wanted to discuss is how we see the business from a valuation perspective. And when we're looking at it, we look at the three segments completely differently. Each one has a nuance in it, and they've even got kind of further nuances within each band. So fiber to the tower, that is, its customers are mobile network operators. Fiber to the business, customers are ISPs, and fiber to the home, customers are ISPs. We are and intend to remain an open access business. We sell the same product to everyone at the same price with just volume discounts depending on how many customers you bring to the network. So if we look at fiber to the tower, we've kind of seen references where there's a revenue per base station. We don't think that works. The reason for it is, again, talking to the point-to-point technology, each base station has a different distance to it. So it is not the same. This is a distance-based product at the heart of it. We do enter into long-term contracts where we build ahead of the demand. So, for example, if we built to a tower outside a metro, there might not be other customers along the line. So we haven't started to monetize the rest of the network around it. And that's the need for the long-term contracts. And as the network densifies along the route, so we get the uplift from FTTB and FTTH. Andries highlighted the difference in the fiber to the tower model with dark versus lit. It really is a preference of each mobile network operator. Okay, so as a summary, we're talking about sites passed, distance, and on the lit products, the one other point was capacity. So we can offer the 1 gig, 10 gig, 100 gig service. It really is a function of the cost of the active equipment. And then obviously CapEx. We are in a CapEx-intensive business. We do always look at ways to deploy more efficiently. And again, talking to network densification, the denser our network gets, the shorter the distance we have to build. Okay. On the business side, the business and the homes work very similarly. Right? We pass premises, we connect premises, we push for uptake percentages. The difference with the business is that as opposed to a suburb where you go past and you've got volume of customers and you're connecting one resident per connection, one home per connection, the business has multi-tenancy in it. There are multiple tenants in some of the buildings. Some have one, but we get pulled to a business premises by a customer. What we're starting to do now is to think about how well do we actually understand the business premises we connect and how many other tenants are in it. At the beginning, the demand was purely to get the first connection to the building. So we go into the base of a building, we kit out a meet me room, and from there to reticulate with inside a building is relatively easy and relatively cost effective because most of the network build, the cost is actually in the civils work, right? Less the product. So I think the product's about 20 to 30% depending on the type of solution, and the rest is civils. Okay. So when we look at FTTB, we do provide some dark fiber offerings. We have seen a big increase in the demand for lit, but it is a mix as well. And there are capacity products too in there. So again, summary, premises passed, uptake percentage. The one we haven't gotten at the moment because we're still early stage is tenancy. How many tenants in the building? And then obviously CapEx. The CapEx for FTTB is slightly obviously less than a tower. It's a shorter distance. We're building within ideally less than 75 meters to connect a building. We obviously focus on the ones that are as close as possible, the near net opportunities. On the fiber to the home, and I think everyone's kind of talked to it, is that when we started in the higher LSM suburbs. The distance, the home frontage is longer, right? As we moved into the lower LSM and the distance shrinks. It's a much shorter yard frontage, if you call it that. So that in itself drops the CapEx cost. But then we had to consider other solutions too to drop the cost further. And really what this was to support the prepaid offering. Now we're selling fiber capacity on a per usage basis, right? So we needed to be as efficient as possible in our CapEx deployment to make that work. So now when we look at FTTH, we look in three distinct segments. We look in core, which is the higher LSM product. We look in reach, which is the mid to lower. And we look at key, where we've deployed Alex, but that's still at POC, but we're starting to expand that now. And we look at the same metrics, homes passed, uptake percentage, and CapEx. And those three levers are what we get to play with in looking at the feasibilities. I think that's it from my side.
Thanks, Graham. Sure, Andres, he knows his stuff. Maybe we can make him a CTO next. I forgot to introduce one other person that's also involved. Craig, it's you. Just stand up, Craig, quickly. So Craig is also a Remgro colleague of mine, but he's on the board of CIVH and DFA and Vumatel together with me. And back at the ranch, he does this, the Remgro valuation. So this slide is actually Craig's Excel spreadsheet output. And if you have questions, I'll pass it on to Craig. But on the left-hand side, Craig takes the financial forecast coming from management, and then he applies his own discounts. I think it's about 20% that he cuts off, and that gives him the 41.2 billion enterprise value. Debt from the top, 14.7 billion. That leaves an equity value of 26.5. If you take our current 57% shareholding, gives us the 15.1 billion that you would have seen in the financial year end for Remgro, end of December, which is then, which numbers from CIVH, Craig? It's September last year, older, September. So there's the lag because DFA's got a March, and CIVH's March year end. Earlier on, I mentioned Vodacom putting the money in. Vodacom's also put out some announcements when the transaction was announced. So we just took some of the information that they publicly put out there and just summarized it on the slide here. I must also, so this is just indicative with what's out there. I did mention that when the transaction closes, the actual valuation will be done then based on actual EBITDA at the time. So this is just a summary of what's currently publicly known. Just to go back a slide, this one excludes the Herotel investment because it was December last year, using old CIVH information. And again, this one also excluding any investment that we've made into Herotel. So you see the 6 billion on the far left. It's the cash that they're going to put into the business at least. We're buying for shares all their fiber assets, excluding long distance. It's the 4.2. We've put the value to it. However, in the meantime, they are continuing to build. They're not waiting for the transaction to close. So that 4.2 will also be much higher because hopefully they're passing more homes in the meantime. Then they're going to do a top-up because they want to get to 30% at least. So again, that 3 billion is a moving target. It could be whatever. But if you take these numbers and you calculate it backwards, assuming that 13.2 billion that we're putting in gives them the 30%, this is their public numbers, that gives you the 44 billion implied equity value. So when they come in, CIVH will have 70%, because they'll have 30. We have 57 of the 70, which gives you then a 17.5 billion valuation. And that compares to the 15.1 that Craig calculated end of the December period. This is all I'm going to say about valuation. I'll leave you with some final thoughts, and then we're going to open up the floor for questions. Again, I can just re-emphasize that I'm, and the whole team, really passionate about the opportunity, not just for the company, not just for the shareholders, current and future, but also for, this can actually make a difference. This can actually help fix South Africa's issues. It can fix education, people, kids being able to do homeschooling, access to YouTube. It can, I mentioned the person sitting in the back room running his own teaching from home. Businesses, you can't be part of the economy if you're not connected. It's like water, electricity, internet. It just has to be there. So this vision of mine, South Africa, change, democratize the internet, take it into Africa. The model that we have, open access, wholesale, see if we can grow the network even larger to get even more benefit to everybody in the end, because scale matters. That really brings us to the end of the formal presentations. So I'm also going to ask Carl, who sits here in the middle, to keep an eye on the online questions. I'm sure there will be online questions, and then we'll give priority to the floor because they went to all the trouble to be here today. So maybe we can start on the floor. I'm sure somebody has a question. Just introduce yourself to everyone.
It's Caitlin Byrne from M&G Investments.
Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Peter. Peter, if you can just explain why you've structured it with bringing Vodacom in at a level below CIVH, and why you think the Africa section will go above the FiberCo. So just in terms of the long-term structure, I would have thought that a lot of the Africa assets will be fiber heavy and therefore come under FiberCo, especially with the Vodacom relationship. And then maybe a question for Graham, how the cash flows work between the FiberCo and CIVH. So where the just generally cash comes in and cash goes out in terms of dividends, and is there a bigger picture here like a REIT structure or something? Yeah, thanks.
So we're not doing REITs at the moment, but if you look at the Vodacom transaction, it's also about complexity. We have the fiber assets. It's easy to box it in. The Africa part is still visionary. To just put that whole lot together for a transaction up front, it was just too complex. Things can change. There's not just Vodacom out there. MTN's got a large network. There are others. So we see that we can play a role much bigger than Vodacom. That's why we've kept it a little bit separate for now. And Graham, you want to take the dividends?
Yeah, so I mean, the agreements cater for flexibility to allow a kind of pre-implementation dividend to be declared, depending on the business's cash flow requirements at the time. The pre-implementation dividend is limited to a maximum of the cash coming in, so 6. And then obviously, I think also just in the process, that cash top-up is not subscription, it's actually a purchase of shares.
Good. Caitlin, right? Thank you. Next one. Carl, anybody still awake out there? Online questions. There's the one at the back.
Hi there, I'm Byron from Allen Gray. Maybe just clarity on that the 3.2, is that kind of acquisition from existing shareholders, or is it new shares to be issued?
The share acquisition, the top-up.
No, yeah, the top-up.
Yes, it's an acquisition from CIVH. So Vodacom would acquire those top-up shares to get to the 30% from CIVH.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Good question.
Great story. Thanks for sharing it. Is there a sort of comparable company somewhere else, ideally listed, which we could look at to see how it's progressed over time?
Mm-hmm. I don't know, Craig or Graham, you've looked at this many times before. If any of you want to, Carl, take a shot. Just a microphone here. Yeah, microphone.
Yeah, so I think in terms of comparables, there's obviously no one locally. We have no legacy assets. We are a pure fiber play. So from a local comparative perspective, there's no one. From an international, there are more players. However, you do tend to have the legacy asset component in there. So there are very few pure fiber players available for comparison. I think it's our biggest advantage is that we don't have to spend large amounts of capex replacing legacy assets. So everything we spend is future-proof. But I'll let Craig do the comparison.
Chris, maybe if I can just add to that, I think some international players one can mention is Cogent, maybe, Unity, Cogent Communications. And then a few years back we had Zayo also trying to put over-the-top services and sort of the content part over the fiber infrastructure, which I think looking back at it for them hasn't worked very well, which is really also why we found that our focus would be in the fiber space, because that's where the growth sits. So trying to put anything over the top and trying to make additional sort of service revenue, we thought wouldn't be the best use of shareholder capital currently. Not saying that might not change.
Craig, yeah, if I can add to that as well, I think a good benchmark would also be the Liberty Vodafone deal. You know, partially obviously per country and then holistically across Europe. A lot of the other incumbents actually did the fiber investments themselves, so the convergence, like a BT, happened inside of the company, except for the Liberty Vodafone. That's a good reference, I think.
Thanks, Chris. Hope it helps.
Tertius Rilian, Caveat Capital Management. Just from a technical point of view, I still don't understand what's the difference between lit and dark.
Okay.
Maybe if somebody can just
okay, Andre's tried, but he failed. Let me try.
On a more elementary basis. Okay, and then secondly, I just wanted to know, it's all, I believe in fiber, I really think it is the future, but I've read a lot of articles in that satellite data communications are also coming, is going to come into its own.
Good question.
Maybe if somebody can just elaborate a bit on that.
Okay, Andres, I'll leave the satellite to you. I'll retry your dark and lit. So you really have to look at dark, meaning you have a piece of glass that we put into the ground or on the pole. So it's just a long piece of glass that's as thin as your hair. And when the glass is there, there's no light going through it. So we take that piece of glass, the pure piece of glass, right into the customer's premises. And out on the other side, we don't put any light on there, because through, just like Vodacom builds a network and MTN with spectrum, the data through the fiber goes with light. As DFA or Vumatel, we don't, in a dark service, put any light into there. So the end customer will have to buy that LED to put at the end of the dark fiber. That's why we call it dark. We sell it dark. That fiber, that dark fiber, belongs to that customer then. It is so big that one customer can actually carry the whole of South Africa's traffic in his one fiber. That's how big an unlimited one fiber as thick as your hair is today. It's just unbelievable. So lit, we introduced lit because not everybody can commit to a dark fiber. It's just too expensive. So we've started creating virtual fibers, and that's why we're lighting up the fiber. We're creating like a virtual fiber with a couple of 100 megabits or a gigabit fiber, whereas a real dark fiber, you can have terabits of data on there, but with a lit fiber, does that sound right?
Yeah, I'm not going to argue. I'll just quickly talk about maybe just general, rules of thumb, where we have satellite, we have wireless, we have fiber. And those things have specific characteristics that makes the one better than the other for certain applications. The one thing I have to say, of course, all of these things, the technology improves. So 10 years ago, the equipment, as Peter said, the fiber capacity is just massive, but it's limited by the equipment that you put on the edges. So fiber technology improves. You can do 1 gigabits per second today. Tomorrow you can do 100. The day after that you can do 1,000 gigabits per second. So the fiber technology increases, or the technology at the ends of the fiber. Same so with wireless. We talk about 3G, 2G, 4G, 5G. 5G capacity also improves, also increases, and similarly so with satellite. But there's certain things. So if you specifically asked about satellite, and let me just perhaps I use an example. If you have an autonomous car, and maybe one day that comes, and the car wants to warn you to apply the brake because someone is in front of the car, that has to be like that. The time delay between the car detecting and telling you or braking automatically has to be instantaneous. That is impacted by a KPI that we call latency. So what is latency? Latency is just the time it takes for a piece of information to go through the network. And latency also depends on distance. Of course, the longer, although speed of light is speed of light, distance matters. Now imagine the signal has to go up to a satellite and come back. So that use case of autonomous cars don't work on satellite and will never work on satellite. Well, let's not say never, but that's one example. If we also look at satellite, fiber networks, especially where you have density, provides much higher capacity than what a satellite can provide. So satellite typically will be used more for rural areas. And again, as I say, we talk about SpaceX, we talk about these things. Technology is improving, throughput is improving, but the demand is also increasing significantly. So you will always, in terms of quality, whether it's just throughput and latency, because latency matters for certain things, in terms of throughput and latency, fiber will always be ahead. Then mobile or wireless networks will be next, and then satellite will be after that.
Yeah. So another way to also look at fiber versus spectrum, which is satellite or mobile, when you're in a residential area and they build a 5G tower in the suburb, that tower broadcasts over all the houses in the suburb. So again, that tower is shared by everybody, and the spectrum and the backhaul. Whereas when you have a fiber to the home service, that fiber is yours. Your neighbor, if he starts Netflixing, and he's not going to influence your service. So there's a huge difference between spectrum services and fiber. It's your fiber, it's your host pipe.
Yes. If I can add, I think it's definitely complementary, especially if you look at Africa. So there'll be places in Kenya where you got the corridor that followed the railway, where you got this dense population. There a satellite, low orbit satellite, 500-kilometer solution will help a little bit in the beginning, but it'll be taken over by a capacity fixed solution. But there are pockets, definitely Tanzania, higher Kenya, Ethiopia, where a satellite solution is the solution because your latency is low. It's low orbit. You've got Bezos chasing it. Your Musk got chasing it a little bit lower. So there's definitely solutions around rural where you got big land mass. But when you go dense, where we look at the 16 million homes, that's dense stuff. You'll have dedicated 4,000-5,000 satellites that just have to service a place like a Soweto. And that's where but the latency is coming down good enough for services, obviously gaming and those real-time stuff where you're going to do medical services over from distance. I mean, that's going to be difficult to go through satellite.
Good, thanks. Anybody else? Name?
Hi, Peter. It's Mikhail Mutala from PSG Asset Management. You've asserted in the past that CIVH would be in a dividend-paying position by, say, FY24, but dependent on an Africa expansion. That was one of the factors that might halt that ability. So can you give us some context into the quantum of capex that you'd look to spend in Africa and how that would affect the dividend-paying ability of the entity?
Yeah, so firstly, there are different scenarios. Africa is just in the starting phase. We're putting together some plans. Honestly, still got a dual role, so need to multiplex each time. But we are really believing in the African opportunity because we've been there. If Vodacom deal happens, there's just too much cash in the system for us. We can't build that much. So there will be cash coming out to shareholders, special dividend. Even without Vodacom, and this is what I've said before, in the financial year 23-24, and Graham, you must help me out, we are in a position to start paying shareholder dividends. That's always been our plan. We're on track. Graham, can you add to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think our dividend policy is always a strategy balanced with our network growth ambitions, right? If we're chasing also the 9.7 billion homes, we always balance that against the dividend. But from our current capital structure, we will be free under our covenants to distribute from mid-23 through to the end of 24.
Yeah, if we stop building tomorrow, all debts paid down in a couple of months, 2 years. But that's not what we want. We see this opportunity. We've shown you the opportunity. Up till now, we've plowed every single cent back into the network, and we believe that 30 billion is now making a difference.
I think just to add too, I mean, to the extent there's no overbuild, we will always prefer to build, right? And in that key space, we don't see a lot of competition building.
It's difficult, eh? Maybe talk a little bit about a return on...
Yeah, we can talk about it. I mean, we are still just short of double figures on a return on invested capital basis. But that is at a 33% uptake on our FTTH network. And I call it circa, we're deployed 22,000 buildings against 297,000 buildings passed. So we are really at the early stage of our network uptake. And that's our return profile. Over the next 5 years, we will deploy extra capital, as we said. And then we start to see our return on invested capital kind of touching on 20%. And that's, again, not achieving full network uptake.
But to conclude on the answer, for now, see Africa separate. This is the focus on FiberCo SA. Africa will have its own plans and its own funding, and we'll put it together at the right time. That one was first. Steve.
Yes, hi, Steve Manal from ABAX. If you just take South Africa, forget Africa for the time being, what will be your capex intensity from this point forward? Because you're still going to roll out some more, but obviously it sounds like the big push has been done. If you compare it to a cell phone network, it sits at what, 15% sort of intensity.
Yes, so we still have that 16 million homes number that we're chasing. However, with the new technologies, with aerial fiber, the capex per home, and because the homes look very different, has come down a lot. But to connect that number of homes is still going to cost a lot. But Graham, can you add to it, or Dietlof?
Yeah. I mean, our forecasts at the moment don't include the Vuma Key market. So the 9.6 million homes that we were talking about, none of our forecasts include that. We're currently in POC. So our capex in the Vuma side will be about 5.8 billion over the next 5 years, with all of that being in the reach market, so the mid to lower LSM.
Yeah. So we're not really looking at it from a capex intensity point of view at this point. It's a land grab. Very low penetrated market, so you're looking at a sub 10 penetrated market at this point. So basically, it's throwing capex at it, So obviously, on a business model that makes sense. So we won't go into areas where there's overbuilt or there's not a good return on investment from an uptake point of view. So if we don't have good show my interests, if we can't see feasibility within it, we don't do it. But at this point, we are chasing, because it's first mover advantage, that helps, because you have to get the first 30% for the investment to make sense. So we're not really focusing on that capex intensity at this point. Like a Vodacom or MTN take 10% of turnover as capex intensity. We're not doing that at this point.
Did you see that look from Nayo when you use the word land grab? She's like that. But we're not land grabbing. It's just the opportunity is there. Others can come and do the same. It's just the demand is so big, and the return is actually not just financial. So I'll come now. Sorry.
Hi, can I go, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, there. Hi, Sam Hartard from 91. I just want to talk to you on the FTTH market. A couple of questions. So, when Neil started this business with Vumatel and that very famous Parkhurst contract that came out and the Homeowners Association came to the market, they said you needed 40% sign up in order for this project to make sense. Mm-hmm. And that's how it's worked throughout, the rest of the country, going to Dainfern, Bryanston, wherever. Can you just explain how it works when you go to the lower segments? Mm-hmm. You call it the core or the key markets. Mm-hmm. What is the sign-up that you need up front? Like, for example, in Mitchell's Plain going there, how you think about that and how long that payback is once you've done it. I think Neil said to us it was an 18-month payback in Parkhurst. Just explain those economics to us first, and I'll come back with a few other questions.
So that last slide that Graham had started touching on some of those issues, because each of those three markets, the core, that's Sandton and Parkhurst, versus Reach, that's Mitchell's Plain, Soweto, versus Key, that is Alex, they are so different. Just take, for example, the capex. In Sandton, you have to trench 50 meters to get to the next home. That's a lot of capex. But you'll see this afternoon, you only have to trench 5 meters to get to the next one. So immediately the capital is less. We're using different technologies to trench. We're using overhead fiber. The ARPUs are clearly very different. So the trick has been to keep all of these in balance. And how I look at it, what we've asked the team to come up with solutions that eventually the return, Ebitda margin on all of these three segments can trend towards the same. It'll take longer when it's a new startup area like the key suburbs. It's going to be heavily infrastructure investment heavy. But if we fast forward a couple of years, that return, because once the core fibers in there, should start returning to the normal. But Dietlof, you have a much better answer.
So we followed a similar principle. That's the first thing. So Neil was quoting 40%. We also use the rule of thumb of 30% uptake. So
30% for both the other two markets.
30% on core,
yeah.
But the uptake in Parkhurst was a little bit fast because it was new. But 30% for us is a feasible. Show my interest. 30% uptake. We go. The big challenge for us is to answer your question is to get the cost of capex down. So we started at 18,000 rand a home. That's with the install cost, and we're under 4,000 rand a home now through different technologies, using aerial, using a hybrid between aerial trenched on the one side. So So the whole focus is to get the capex down, and then obviously that looks at the return profile. But what we are seeing that in your lower LSM, the uptake is higher and faster than what we're seeing in the higher LSMs. And the reason for that is because of your price proposition. I mean, you're coming in at a $399 inclusive of that resale price at 30 gig speeds, so 30 meg speeds. So the proposition is fantastic, and the value for them is also fantastic because you got 400 gig being used in that house. So taking data from different areas like mobile away and consolidating that into a usage profile in a house. But still 30%. Uptake in the low LSM is higher, quite substantially higher than in the other areas. And payback period, they might have been looking at 18%. We were always looking at about a 24-month to a 36-month type of a return type of profile, roughly.
You mentioned... He mentioned the 30%. So when you look at a new suburb, that's also a magical number, because sometimes there are more than one fiber operator in there. But once you're above 30, it becomes increasingly more difficult for the second guy to also have a profitable business. So that 30 is kind of the magical number.
Yeah, I think and that's the overbuilt structure that you're seeing now, But it's always linked to capex. If you're a second player in the market, it's difficult because you have to compete on that first 30%, which is the critical 30%. We believe that your total penetration, just on a rough thumb suck as well, is about 65%. So you're competing then 50-50 for the rest of the 30%. So suddenly, it becomes a different business model, and that's why we're not big on overbuild. So we actually pull out of areas where there's aggressive overbuild happening. And that's for me using smart capex to say, listen, first get the capex down, make sure your show my interest is up roughly 30 to 40% in the beginning. You sign up really 30% within the first a few months on that, and then make sure there's no overbuild in that area.
I would have thought that the hurdle would have needed to be higher in the lower LSMs because it's a prepaid market. So 30% you're guaranteed in Sand or Parkhurst, they're going to stay forever. You sign up 30% in Mitchell's Plain, month 2 they're gone. Surely you have to have a higher sign-up rate.
So there's two models on it. We had exactly the same idea in the beginning. So we launched 2 prepaid models, a recurring model, which is like a monthly debit order, but it's on a prepaid model. You pay first and then there's a 28-day voucher model. And on both those models, people stay. So your stickiness is much more than that we anticipate.
That was the big surprise.
Because it's a utility. It's data in abundance. It's like opening a tap and you've got running water with pressure.
And
it's a utility. So the challenge, and what your competitor is actually not giving you a utility, uncapped, unrestricted, unshaped. And suddenly that stickiness becomes so huge. But we'll build different stickiness models in. We're looking at a solution now where we can start maybe through a discovery or through a medical aid, give some medical services through it. So you'll start building those services into those prepaid models, which creates that stickiness more.
Okay, so for the 16 million homes, it's 30%, whichever segment you think is the uptake, which is really interesting. Okay, can you give us timelines? When are you going to hit 16 million homes?
Listen, I don't know. No, I just think we must do it faster. Imagine we had more coverage throughout COVID. That's so we were a little bit late. If you look at COVID and we had 5 million more homes, imagine the impact. So
but that's also where
we're chasing.
Vodacom helps and put the whole picture together. We can really, and that's why we want to fast forward it. That's why we're looking at partners because the demand is now.
May I ask one more? I know I'm hogging. It's the last one, and if there's time afterwards, I'll come back. It's just, Andries, on the fiber to the business, you said that there are another 25,000 businesses that are within 5 meters of your reach. Are they signed up with other operators, or are they just free to take now, so it could be a doubling overnight, should you get that proposition right?
Just comment on that. It's actually an interesting question in the sense that it's not that easy to get granular detail around what's in the buildings. And we're thinking about methods. How do we do that? How do we find out who's there, how many tenants? So we spoke about smart capex model, how it can, and we are actually looking at data sources like Facebook. For instance, Facebook and you try and draw some conclusions around Facebook data. So you can go speak to Facebook. They help you build these smart CapEx models. So if you ask us precisely on the 25,000, do we know exactly what is there and what the tendency is? No, we are not sure. One thing I can also tell you, though, is the 25,000 is premises. So there's an erf. There's a property, but there could be 2, 3, 4 buildings on there as well. There could be more customers, etc. So one must also not be too fixated about the 25, meaning 25,000 connections, then it's done. There's certainly more available, but we don't have the detailed information on what's on the 25.
We have to do this one. Sorry for taking so long.
Murray Winkler, Lorium Capital. Just to come back to a couple of financial questions on the funding structure, maybe, Graham. What is the ideal amount of debt for the business on a long-term basis? Obviously, keep Africa separate, but it's sort of 1/3 of the assets funded by debt, firstly. And then the second one, Peter, you mentioned 20% discount rate roughly in the valuation. What is the actual discount rate? Because you go 10 years out assumptions, and we know we're going to be very wrong over 10 years. It could grow much faster.
So the 20%.
What rate would the DCF be?
My 20% was a different 20%. It was just a haircut that he took on the financial forecast. It wasn't a discount rate that I referred to.
Okay, I thought there was a discount rate mentioned close to 20%. You did your cash flows forecast, and then you did a DCF back over 10 years.
No, when we talked to return on invested capital, we were talking about our net operating profit after tax relative to invested capital.
Murray, there's a discount applied to the valuation. To the valuation, yeah.
20.
Discount rate, yeah. 20%.
Haircut.
The discount rate is not 20%. Okay, I was just wondering clarity on that.
From a debt perspective, I mean, we think this business can comfortably hold north of 3.5 times EBITDA, especially as we grow out. We are kind of discussing with banks whether there's appetite for more. We have historically been higher. We are coming down quite quickly, and to Peter's point, if we turn off the capex, we de-gear very quickly. So by 2024, we should be below 2.75 times, 2.5, 2.4 times.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you. Sure. That one first, there behind Marissa.
Hi, it's Richard from Genesis. Just a quick question on, as you build this out in South Africa and in the rest of Africa on talent. So it's great that you've got the kind of ex-Vodacom team and you've seen this before and you know what you're doing, but presumably the depth gets quite thin quite quickly. How you'll kind of fill the gap? And what types of profiles of people are you finding and looking for? Thanks.
Unless you've stolen a lot of people in the industry.
Yeah, no, that is a tricky question. How to get talent and people and skills. And I suppose it also depends a little bit on how you're going to do it. The theory is, so let me not talk about Africa, but let me talk about South Africa. The theory is that when the Vodacom transfers the assets into CIVH, there are people on that side that do this type of business. So immediately, and so you can extrapolate that to Africa to a degree, and you will see that to a lesser or larger degree. There are already people in the mobile operators or whoever you partner with that does that. Yes, skills is, I'm not going to say that we are not going to have an issue with skills. We will probably in some instances have issues. But there are other people, expats, although, there's a limited supply in terms of bringing expats into the country, but there are people out there that will be able to service the markets. I think the last comment, and it is not, on the one hand, it doesn't sound that positive, but there's a sort of a little bit of a positive spin to that. If I look at DFA, what happened to DFA over the last few months, we downsized. People went on retirement or went on to other things. So the reality, you have pools like that as well, where you can tap into the pool of people and resources, and then to go into Africa.
And we're not doing everything in-house. We also have partners, and they are also continuously recruiting. Detlef, how do you see it?
Yeah, listen, it's a good question. And You know, what you see, all African markets are different. That's the first thing, totally different. You know, so I think you'll have huge challenges on way leaves, right of ways, things like that. From a skills point of view, we don't have all the people, but we did downscale. If you look at it from a process point of view, we downscaled, you know, employees from 800 to 380 just in Vuma. So there's processes that I think we can replicate, you know, and that leads to scalability. But you'll have to get the scalability right, and you have to do it in a super disruptive way. If you can't get the disruptive way going forward into Africa and just try and do it as the normal Africa deployment, it's not going to work. You know, so we haven't worked out the business models in detail yet, but we've got very structured plans in the operational teams to see how we create a scalable model from wherever we are, you know, and a lot of that might be centralization of a few things. But it's all these countries are totally different. So we're in the beginning phases of that.
Thank you. Very good question.
Thanks. Peter Shane Watkins, All Weather Capital. So
Hey,
you referred a few times to first mover advantage. It feels to me like, you know, this is going to be, unlike wireless, it's going to be kind of a winner takes all in a certain area over time, which obviously makes the business model very attractive. You know, can you just give us a sense of, in some ways, what your market share is? Like, let's say you've got, I think you mentioned 23,000 kilometers of fiber. I mean, what would the country's total fiber installed capacity be now? And in 5 years' time, you know, how many kilometers do you think you'll have, and what percent of the total fiber installed capacity would that be? I'm just asking because it feels like a very strong, attractive business model on that basis.
Yeah, if you look at the evolution of the business, it becomes more complex than just kilometers of fiber. And Telkom's got also thousands of kilometers of fiber. It becomes more relevant about where you put the fiber. We believe that we've strategically deployed the fiber in the right places. So the 5 meters from the businesses. So it took a long time to plan the network very carefully. So going forward, it's not just about more kilometers. It's about now how do we mine the business. Take just homes passed. I mentioned the market share number there. It was 39% that we think we pass of all homes passed in the country. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And of all homes passed, we passed 30%, and of all homes passed, we've connected 30%, more or less. And business is more difficult to see. So we've shifted away from just chasing kilometers. We really want to go past all those homes in Alex. And again, then it's a very different revenue model, cost model. And that's why I asked Graham to spend time on the valuation, because it becomes super complex to forecast really what's going to happen. But yes, 31 billion invested fiber in the ground, that is definitely helping us. We are the prime fiber provider at the moment.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Peter. Claude from Denker
Hello,
Capital.
Claude.
Just a quick question on Ebitda margins. If you can just give us a sense, I mean, we've heard some pretty significant numbers for the business, above 60%, assuming you get to, you know, scale. But maybe if you can talk a little bit between FTTT, FTTH, and obviously the fiber to the business. And I would have thought those types of margins are ridiculously high for, you know, for the business. But maybe you can shed a little bit of light on that and give us a feel for that. Thanks.
I'm not a financial guru, but I'll give it a go. So firstly, the margins, because you're building this very expensive fiber network, once it's in there, and because the fibers are so big, and because we're putting multiple fibers in there, it's invested. You have that 40,000 kilometers of fiber. Now you can start adding the customers. So the margin trends up. So if you take the old business, the DFA business, that margin of that piece of the business has trended up because we've connected more and more customers on the same infrastructure. So yes, that piece of the business has trended up to 60% margin. But the minute we go into a new venture, let's take fiber to the home, then it's right down zero again, and we have to build it up. But in the long term, the same maths apply, and over 5 8-year period, that trends up. So if you fast forward, definitely it will all equal out at that level. And then when it's all connected, there's no profit now, but it should start pushing out. Carl, do you have a smarter answer? Graham?
We also experience high degrees of operating leverage, right? I mean, the back office costs for us remain static regardless of the uptake percentage. So as our network matures and our uptake profile starts to take hold, I mean, it flows through. So
there's benefit in scale on this one, you know, and I think if you see the scale, and that's where I say a little bit to that as well, the previous question as well, you know, scale is going to be key in time, you know, because that creates those efficiencies.
You have to be
then
patient.
I think you'll maintain these solid EBITDA margins, you know, but scale is super critical.
Our key will be unprofitable for a couple of years now. We've taken a long-term view. This is where mobile was 20 years ago, in that democratizing.
Thanks.
Stefan and Hannes, you must help me. There have been so many hands around.
Thanks. Dino again, Investec. Graham, sorry, I'm just clarifying earlier points. They're not new questions. Did you say your ROIC was currently below your WACC? Was that the statement you made?
Yes, at the moment, right?
Okay.
And that's predominantly because we're deploying large amounts of capex. We deployed 3.6 billion in the last year, of which probably 1 billion of it was back-ended towards the financial year. So there's a timing component here. So we obviously deploy the capex and then we start lighting it up afterwards.
And then I think you alluded to a target of 20% over time or something like that?
We're seeing as the uptake curve increases, right, obviously it improves. So you built the network for a certain capacity, and as we kind of track it, and we are seeing the uptake curves on a cumulative basis across all the products increase.
What level of uptake gets you to that ROIC target? Is it 40%?
That's not even max. Yeah, I mean, we've got, obviously you've deployed different things. So I think Dietlof mentioned earlier that our oldest suburbs have a very high uptake percentage and our newest ones have a much lower one. So it's always a blend between when you last deployed capital and when you're measuring it.
Okay. And then Dietlof, just you were saying something about payback periods, and I didn't quite get the number of months because there was some confusion.
Yeah, I was referring to the 18 months payback that Neil previously stated. We, depending on the uptake per area, we're looking at roughly at a 36-month to a 4-year payback period, if you look at it across the board.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Carl, your online audience must be thinking that you're asleep.
Yeah, and it also depends on the capex.
Is there anybody out there? Can we just take some online questions?
I think, Peter, a lot of the questions have been asked or touched on in the conversation, so I'm looking for sort of the fresh ones here. Maybe the one question, if we can give a sense of what we think the revenue growth will look like going forward in sort of broad bands, you know, is it 5 to 10%, and let's say on a medium term, 5-year sort of horizon, is it 5 to 10 or 10 to 15 or 15 to 20%? Do we have a sense for what that might be? And also, where might margins get jeopardized? So what's the threat that could undermine the margins?
Yeah, so a couple of key points in there. So firstly, the revenue, because there's not one product, there are like lots of different ones to really forecast the revenue trend. But we can look at the history, and any of you want to give a shot at this answer?
Yeah, I mean, our tower portfolio is our most mature portfolio, and it's now a function of kind of the unfibered towers, and we're getting closer to them. So I would say that that's probably our lowest percentage. We're seeing on the homes, we're north of 37%, and that's predominantly driven by new build, right? And then we're seeing the business, which during COVID was a bit flatter, but we're seeing that as a big opportunity segment for going forward. So it will be north of double digits on the business side. So
we're really focusing on the segments and the products and the FTTT versus FTTB versus FTT home, and then inside home we have the 3 different segments, and we're measuring them completely separately. We're more chasing that we can get the costs and investment and the tariff balance that we can trend the margin back to the levels that we set previously.
Then there's a question on Herotel. Can you give us a bit more of a sense of where do they operate? What are the sort of key towns or key regions, if that's possible? And then is there an option to acquire control? Where does it stand?
Yeah, we have 48% today. That deal's done. We have not got any rights in the business at the moment. We are submitting, or maybe this week or last week, submitting for control. We want to acquire 100% of Herotel, but it'll maybe more color. Why did we buy it? What do you see in those towns? Maybe you can take reach into those towns.
Yeah, no. So I think the opportunity is definitely it's very community based. Little wireless companies that they consolidated into one and then converted a lot of the wireless into fixed solutions. So it's for us a fantastic model going into those little secondary towns. There's more than 500 of these little secondary towns and normal towns across South Africa. It's very localized, so it's very community based. But what's very positive for us is the outskirts of these areas where you can actually go and roll out your low LSM in your key areas, and we see that as a fantastic way from a capital deployment point of view as well, and expanding networks into the.
Can you name a few of these towns?
Yeah, Bella, there's a lot in the Vaal Triangle. Sasol is one of them. So it's all across Polokwane. I mean, there's
500 of them.
Yeah, 500 of them, and yes, I mean, as you see also with COVID, people moving back, going into little secondary towns. You're looking at even in Cape Town where people go to McGregor's and those places. Those are places that was not on our list of deploying fibre. It was just the backhaul and the access to those towns were a little bit too expensive. But now with DFA consolidating that on the infracode structure, suddenly it makes sense, because we can do it more affordable, and I think we can give it to more places. And then obviously you can expand where your scale then increases, and suddenly the business model makes sense. So effectively that's the plan of it, and it's really a fantastic. It was the way they consolidated the WISPs, the wireless access providers, was a fantastic mechanism of creating these pockets of scale, and I think that's the benefit of being part of that investment.
Thank you.
There were a number of questions on the Africa strategy, when and how. I think that's mostly been answered. There were questions on the sort of competitive market forces and market share. I think we spoke about that. Questions on lit and dark fibre. That's been answered. I think the only sort of remaining question was, can you give us a sense for how big the Vodacom network was that was acquired? I don't think we've seen that number.
Yeah. So financially, using similar valuation principles to how we valued the business, it was the 4.2 billion at the time that we did the transaction, signed the agreement. That was last year, end of last year. In the meantime, they are running full steam ahead, building, because just in case the deal doesn't come through, that they're not left short. So going forward, a number of homes passed. I don't know if it's in the public domain, but it will make a big difference if we suddenly add. Unless maybe you can also talk about the access to, if we use their fibre network to the base station, suddenly you have a bigger cloud that you can provide services to others too. How incremental is the difference?
Maybe the first thing that I'll say is that the asset that we acquire, it's not, and Peter, you said that, it's not open access. So they're connecting, and it was mainly built to connect base stations. They're connecting a lot of base stations, a lot of their own base stations. As Peter also said, then that passes buildings. They did not monetize that. The connection rate on their network, we call it the transfer asset network, is very, very low. So we have a huge opportunity to apply what we do in DFA to that part of the network. So
it's very little overbuilt between us and Vodacom.
Very, very little overbuilt, and they just didn't sell FTTB services on the network. They connected base stations, and I was probably part of the culprit, but the engineers decided to stuff this. I'm just connecting my base station, and then someone leave the decision to on-sell or upsell the FTTB services on that just didn't happen. So look at it. It is quite a few thousand kilometers of fibre that we are going to buy with them. And as Peter said, it's not the long-haul stuff, because the long-haul stuff, there's a lot of competition on there. And so many people have capacity on long-haul. We have the DFA has some long-haul, but we decided not to buy those assets. The valuation of those assets is below the carrying value the way we see it from a revenue perspective. Of course, the mobile operators have different drivers. They have cost-saving drivers, and that made the business case positive for them.
Thank you. So Shamil, if you're watching, thanks for giving us Andries and Dietlof.
But just on the fiber to the home, so they're continuing building, so we don't have a fixed figure, but it's between 130,000 homes to 160,000 homes that will come across. Mostly MDUs, so it's multi-dwelling, so it's mostly estates, limited to open access, obviously, but we'll open that up to all the ISPs. But I would say it's between 120 and 160,000 homes that will come across.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks. Exhausted your list. Any more questions here before we go off to lunch in Mitchell's Plain? The rain has stopped. Is it? Any further questions? Thank you. That was amazing to tell you the story, share our vision with you. This is the leadership. We also have Byron and Raymond and Nayo and Craig here. So over lunch, if you have more questions, feel free to ask more difficult questions. Thank you very much.
The team, of course, Dietlof and Andries and Graham. I think a lot of information that's been shared, and many of us sitting here like sponges, walking away with greater perspective and more clarity that will hopefully add to your positions and, of course, your views on not only CIVH, but its participation in Remgro's portfolio as a key driver for you to continue investing in. So on that note, we really appreciate the interaction that we've been able to share with many of you who have joined us in person, and, of course, those that have joined us for the webcast. Thank you again for your vibrant and aggressive questions. It really does help to get further clarity and understanding as to how it is that we can continue to build on providing more insight and information on the strategic direction of the entity going forward. A reminder to those of you who are in the room that there is a coach available. We will be headed to Mitchell's Plain for a tour of the site and, of course, asking more questions, fully unpacking and recognizing the impact that's been made, not only in terms of identifying growth opportunities, but quite literally changing people's lives, as Peter mentioned earlier on. So please do join us for that. I understand it will be departing at 12:45, if I'm not mistaken. 12:45, at about 12:45, but the coach is available. We will provide any signage and clarity and communication to you to make your way there. To those again who have joined us on the webcast, thank you very much. We look forward to engaging you. And if there are any further questions that we have not been able to address, you are more than welcome to contact the team, investor relations team, for any further clarity and insight by sending them in mail, investor.relations@remgro.com. There we go. On that note, thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight having you with us. And of course, thank you to the Remgro team as well for giving us insight into today's conversations. We wish you nothing but ongoing success. Stay safe, keep warm, and until our next engagement, do take care and we'll touch base again. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.